All right, welcome back. Another looking for work session. Drop me a comment in the chat box if you have a question about your job search. More than happy to hang out here and answer questions for folks. We do this every week, so every Tuesday, 12 o'clock, we jump online and just try and do our best to help give people a little boost if you're out there looking for work, especially if this is your first opportunity or trying to get into a job in tech, looking to launch a career. More than happy to share some insight. Usually start off talking a little bit about maybe something I've seen on LinkedIn or a question people have had over the course of the past week. And so one thing I'll just touch on is the fact that the process itself, again, if you just sort of like follow the tips that I suggest and use sort of a mentality of treat the job search like a job. The process is pretty straightforward. And although it may take some time, if you put the effort in, then it's merely a numbers game, right? And so one of the things I read this week that I pushed back on a little bit was that individuals, when they interview, should be asking for like critical feedback after an interview. And the pushback that I gave was, and Happy New Year, Sumita, good to see you. The pushback I gave was, in many cases, hiring managers aren't going to provide that, and they really shouldn't, because it's probably not going to lead to a positive, if it's really critical, right? And if they didn't hire you, it's probably not going to result in a easy conversation, and it could become a confrontational conversation. If you look at it from the hiring manager's perspective, not yours, because I'm assuming you're going to take the feedback in a responsible way and appreciate it, and not sort of like get either angry or take it in a defensive manner. But that's how a lot of people may take it. And so because of that, there's a risk that conversation could go south really fast and result in some potential just like chaos is what might be caused by someone basically saying, hey, the reason why we didn't hire you is because during the interview you said X, Y, and Z, and it made us believe X, Y, and Z. Now, that may be how they felt, but the typical response is going to be something along the lines of, hey, we decided that we're going to take a pass and we think you need to get more experience. That's mostly what you're going to get out of folks. And it's fine to ask, but you should have zero expectation that they'll provide more than that, more than just a blanket statement about, hey, we think you need more experience, especially as a junior engineer. There could be other things that you're sort of blowing during the interview process, but my suggestion would be to, again, use discipline and follow the process. That's doing at least 10 applying, reaching out to companies, making sure that you're connecting with someone inside that's sort of your internal champion, and then following up on a regular basis with those folks that you've submitted applications with, maintaining and managing those relationships that you're creating inside of people with organizations that you want to go work for. And then when you get an interview opportunity, doing your best during that interview. And you will walk away, in most cases, with a good sense about how the interview went. And you will not need that many interviews. If you're making some significant mistakes during the interview, then it will be pretty clear. Like, you should have a pretty good indication. The way I would suggest that you get better feedback, if you're really interested in, I want some critical feedback about the interview process of how I'm doing an interview, do mock interviews, right? Find a senior software engineer within an organization to be willing to, give you an interview. Treat it seriously, treat it the same way as you would an on-site, and they will probably be able to give you and share with you more candid advice that would be more fruitful and helpful. I know a lot of people will ask, how do I know how well I'm doing during an interview? Well, you should have a pretty good sense of it. At the end of the interview, you should feel like, man, the tone and tempo of the conversation should shift during the interview. At some point, they'll go through an evaluation process where you'll detect from them they're trying to either understand whether or not you're a good behavioral fit and that you're a good cultural fit in the organization. There'll probably be some technical assessment that they'll do during the interview. And then it will sort of shift and you will detect that they're starting to kind of sell you on the organization. They're starting to talk a lot more about what it's like to work at the organization, some of the perks, and why you might enjoy a career at X, Y, or Z company. When that happens, it's a good indication, okay, conversation is going in the right direction. You probably did okay in the interview. Whether you're going to get the job or not, whole separate issue, right? Because there could be other people that you're competing against, and there could just be a better candidate, a better fit for that role. But the overwhelming sort of like desire for us all to have like more information and our curiosity, don't let that take over. It's fine to ask for feedback after the interview. It's fine to, follow up email if they say, hey, we're going to pass, we think you need more experience, ask maybe some more specific questions, but don't go into it with the expectation that they're going to be super responsive or give you super detailed responses, because it's just not the way that it works. And it can't, because we just can't anticipate how someone's going to react when you give them critical feedback. They're not an employee, so they're not entitled to it. You're not entitled to it as a candidate. So take it with a grain of salt. If somebody tells you, oh, you should be asking everybody that you interview for this information, I don't think it's super helpful, because it's usually not the problem. It's usually not the interview. It's usually the steps leading up to the interview. People aren't getting enough interviews. And then they know that they're just like technically they're blowing it during the assessment portion, or they just need more practice. And so you may need to go through either a few mock interviews before the real one, or you're going to go through a few real ones before you actually get things sort of massaged enough that you're doing well and you're able to really translate what your skill set is, how it applies to the job, and why you're the best candidate for that role. So now's the part where I'm going to kind of open it up for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment box below. I'll give you a few minutes because I know it takes a little while for those to come through, but please, again, feel free to drop some comments in the box below, and I'll do my best to try and answer those questions. All right. I know I had a couple questions that came through via email, so I can go through those as well, and then take any additional questions that come in as they come. So don't be shy. Drop them in the comment box, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. So the first one from the emails are, so someone asks, I've heard that resumes should be limited to one page. Is there a one-page rule? If so, does it count against me if I have a longer resume? No. So the answer to that question is absolutely not. I think the best idea is to make sure you put your strongest information closer to the top of the resume and your least strong or least strengths towards the bottom, right? So it should be sort of like in, because, and the logic behind that is because people are going to be scanning, right? They'll want to very quickly pick up on whether or not you're a right fit and want to move forward with conversation, or whether or not it just doesn't make sense at this point to have a conversation. So you want those strongest attributes to be high up so that it's really easy for people to identify, oh yeah, this makes a ton of sense, and they'll keep reading and they'll go further down. If you start with weak sauce up towards the top, they may never get to the bottom and be like, this doesn't look like a good fit, right? Merely because of that too. They might be like, look, they haven't even taken the time to structure the resume well. So clearly this is not somebody that's going to, see the problem and solve it in the right way. So keep that in mind. If you have enough relevant experience to go more than a page, absolutely. If you have experience, but it's not as relevant, let's say it's experience from a different industry or trade, since a lot of people are transitioning into tech, if you have existing background in maybe, frontline worker, right? So if you are a frontline worker, maybe you're a service worker, great. I think that's good information. I wouldn't go beyond 2 pages. I'd try and limit it to 2, but I don't think there's any advantage to keeping it to only 1 page and be limited to just that amount of real estate, unless the application specifically says to limit it, and then limit it to 1 page, right? But unless, so I think the 1 page rule is outdated and not super useful. So, again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment box. I'll rip through the ones that I got already. So that was the first one. Second one is, how do I find internal champions inside of an organization? If you don't know anybody there, how do you make contact? Okay, so how I would go about doing it is I would reach out via LinkedIn, right? Or Twitter. Like if your thing is Twitter, awesome. Twitter could be just as helpful. I personally find Twitter kind of like frantic. It's really noisy, a lot of going on, so it's not the right medium for me. So personally, I don't think it's the right fit for how I would want to interact and how I'd want to reach out to people. But I love LinkedIn, a little bit like deeper in content. So I would go after using the tool that you're most comfortable with to just reach out to people and just try and connect on a very human level. You know, follow some of their content, like and share, and it'll make it way easier for you to make that connection and then see if you can kind of pivot that conversation into, hey, what is it that you guys do? Love to find out more about your company, etc. Hey, I've seen a couple people say New Year's, Happy New Year's, Happy New Year's, Greg and Neil. Good to see you out there. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop in the comment box. I hope there's lots of people that are out looking for work and not discouraged, because I know it can be really tough, especially as a junior engineer. You're trying to get your foothold. A lot of folks are saying, you know, how do I get experience without a job? How do I get a job without experience? You know, that whole deal. And that kind of ties into one of the questions someone asked is, would I recommend working on an open source project or bounties? So I'm all about the personal passion projects, personal projects. And I think that can work in terms of like open source and bounties, as long as you're doing it because you really are interested in those projects. And I know that's going to sound weird because people are like, well, why would you work on it? I think some people think it's kind of like back in the day, there used to be this thought process that if you could get a really high score on Stack Overflow, meaning if you responded to a lot of people's questions and you answered questions and people valued the questions, the answers that you questioned, then that would somehow translate into like you'd have more karma and clout in that community, and that would get your resume sort of to the top of the stack. I don't think that's a good idea. So you should be going into open source really with the idea of like, hey, this is an interesting project. I'd love to see if I can solve something or if I can handle one of these issues. I would not go into it like some people are just like, well, I just want to like accumulate as many contributions as I possibly can. So they're looking for like spelling mistakes and little like things, but they're not super interested in the project themselves. That's not the approach I would take. So if you're going to do it, genuinely take a passion or interest in the projects, and you may find one that you really enjoy. Then you can go deep into that one project and really get to know the code base. So I would say try and focus on fewer projects versus like just a shotgun approach to, let me see how many places I can find like missing semicolons and spelling errors and things like that. Not super helpful. And it's super transparent to people that are looking at it. They're saying like, what kinds of contributions do you make? So bounties, have at it. So if you have the tenacity to go after a bounty, for those of you that aren't familiar, so that's when there's a bug or a defect and someone will say, hey, we'll put a prize either for you to find a bug or for you to fix a bug, right? So those can be great ways for you to cut your teeth, get some experience, and at the same time, provide a real value to somebody that's like, hey, they might actually like pay some money for you to fix this little problem that they have. So question that just came through. I got a couple more here, but I'll start with questions that are coming through live. So Mr. Puck asks, background is architecture engineering, but I'm doing career change into IT. Look at data analysis course in DataQuest and data engineering, nanodiverse and Udacity. Is there any apprenticeship in your organization? Not yet. So we are going to do a data engineering apprenticeship. We have not launched or not picked a launch date yet, but it is real close. So hang tight. We'll have a data engineering program soon. It's one of the things that's on our radar for the first quarter. And similarly, people ask all the time, when's the next cohort starting? We have not picked the date yet. So, and it's not that we're being coy. It's just the way we operate, the way we work is no one pays anything. No one pays any tuition to go through our program. And so it's really largely driven by the relationships we have with larger businesses that are looking for help. So we have to have a project. And once we have a project, then we can hire folks to make sure we have resources to put onto those projects. So the more projects we have, if you've got a company out there that you want to work for, tell them to work with us. Tell them to give us a call, and we'll see if we can connect them with the right resources. And then that opens up us have the opportunity for us to hire more people. So we've got a pretty good sized bench right now. I think we have roughly 15 apprentices. So we're always looking for an opportunity for us to continue to provide opportunities for folks. So data engineering, it's right around the corner. That answers your question. I know it doesn't give you a direct date, but and I'm not a huge fan of the like nano degrees or like courses in general, unless you have sort of a bunch of projects that you've lined up that you know you'll be able to sort of execute to keep those skills fresh and give you lots of reps and practice. It's great to get started, but I feel like there's plenty of free resources. You could use free resources to get up to speed with data engineering as well. And then it's really about the projects. It's really about hands on the keyboard, passion projects or projects that you can take on that will demonstrate the skills that you've just learned. That's what's going to translate into an opportunity or into a job, right? Because without that, you could spend many, many years just doing it as a hobby, like I did. Spent lots and lots of time. I've been writing software for like 32 years. Spent a lot of time just doing it as a hobby. Nothing wrong with that. So, next up, yeah, I think we covered all of the like 1, 2, 3. Yep, those are all good. So, any other questions out there? Feel free to drop them in the chat box. More than happy to answer them. I'll be speaking tonight at the San Diego JavaScript meetup. So, for those that are interested, doing some more career stuff. Actually, SDJS is this one. So, a meetup here tonight. I'll talk about some career mapping. And then I'll be speaking later this week at the data engineering meetup. So data engineering San Diego. So if you want to check out that talk, again, that'll be later this week. All right. Any other questions? If not, this is going to be a short one. I'm having spaghetti this afternoon, so I'm gonna have my spaghetti if we don't get any more questions. Happy to see Neil Bloom online. It's gonna be a good year. 2021 is gonna be a really good year. Thank you, Janet. I appreciate giving. Anybody else? Any questions, comments, concerns? My prediction, 2021, going to be a great year for junior engineers. Lots and lots of hiring, I think, is going to happen this year. That's my prediction. Lots of hiring this year. All right, I don't see any other questions coming through. So that must mean everybody's heads down, filling out job apps, reaching out, following up, scheduling firsts. I like it a lot. So again, if you are on the job hunt, feel free. You can drop me an email. It's mike@sdcs.io. Jason asked another question. What is a good side project for a data engineer? That's a good question. So the key skills that I look for out of data engineering would be first of all, the foundational stuff, right? So I'd say you want to be really good at ETLs, right? So you want to pick a project where you're getting the data. Maybe you're taking it from like a MongoDB. You're extracting, translating, transforming it, and loading it into a more like relational database, or maybe hydrating the data. So maybe taking data from two different types, combining it together into a record or one record with attributes for maybe an individual, and then pushing that into a relational database. So what's real hot right now is e-commerce. And so there's lots of like ways that people are using either marketing technology, social media technology to reach out, get lots of data about and observe patterns about users. And a lot of that comes through and then needs to be sort of like transformed and loaded for more long-term, more like queries. So projects that can demonstrate ETL, I think number one. SQL, you need to be like super good at SQL. So like it's still the bread and butter of being able to just pull out raw data. And a project where you can deliver real value, right? So if you can deliver real value, that's high up on the list for side projects. That being said, there are tons of organizations out there that have a need right now that are like transitioning into e-commerce to maybe traditional brick and mortar. So I think e-commerce is easy because there's lots of data coming through, right? You have lots of people browsing, lots of people making purchases, lots of different products and categories, lots of interesting data that you can do some analysis on. So it's really about pulling that and then being able to sort of generate some sort of a workflow out of it. So that's what I would suggest is sort of like a good side project would be finding a data source that you're getting some good, like a consistent amount of data from, and then being able to figure out how do you wire up the ETL? How can you do some queries against that relational data once you actually have it? And that's fine. Those are the basics, right? So hopefully, Mr. Pat, that answers your question. The other place that you can look is there used to be a site called 1K Projects. You could also look on, it's not called Elance anymore. I guess it's called Upwork. So you could look on Upwork, and I think Upwork could give you a good idea of the types of projects out there that people are looking for help with. I would not bid on those projects. I would just use them as inspiration of like, okay, this is what I'm seeing people on the industry doing that's real common, and then focus on having a few projects that can demonstrate those skills, right? So I'd start there. Project ideas for Java development. Okay, well, Java's got a lot of usage. Are you talking about like specifically? So, Gregory, are you talking about for web development, for embedded? Like, what is there context that where would you like to be? That would kind of help me to understand. Like, okay, these are some interesting things. People ask this a lot too, and it's like the world is big. So it's hard to say this specific passion project. It's more about the attributes that you make sure your passion project like is able to demonstrate that I think makes the difference. So if I was going to assume that you meant Java for like web services, for any kind of services, APIs, so I would want to make sure you had a strong handle on APIs, right? Because a lot of the data that's going to come through for like web services is going to be API like related. So I'd want to make sure you could also transform the data and basically be able to like figure out how you override API endpoints, even though it's not necessarily the best case scenario. How can you do something fancy with the API and endpoints? How do you authenticate? How do you have access control lists? Like those would be things that I want to make sure that you're baking into any of your side projects. So you can really demonstrate not only is this how you could actually either consume data or provide data, but how can you do it in a secure way? How can you do it in a way that demonstrates that there's a little bit of logic behind the scenes? And so I would look for projects where you can leverage those skills and demonstrate that you have a mastery of those skills. So if it's more like embedded devices, I think for embedded devices, here's something that I'm interested in. So again, I tried to make it like, okay, something that you could see a real tangible benefit out of. So I'm using this program right now. It's called Melodics to learn how to play the drums and the pads and the keyboard. I'm trying to do all three at once. It's crazy, but it's fun. So they have this really cool, it's almost like Guitar Hero, where they're showing you these little bars and then you like hit on the keys at the right time and you get green if it works and you get orange or purple if it's not good, too soon, too wrong key, whatever. I would love to be able to have an app where I could play along with like any tracks, like Spotify, anything, right? And so again, this would require me, the way I would tackle this problem, be like, okay, if I was really interested in doing this, I'm going to go out and first see if there's a library for MIDI. If there's a MIDI library, awesome. Now I just need to figure out, okay, is there a great way for me to be able to leverage the sounds in my computer or the sounds from somewhere else? And then it's just like, let's go to town. Let's figure out how we can make this work, right? Mixer technology, all that kind of stuff. So start with something that you're like currently doing and like, where's a real need? Like, I don't think it'd be super hard to do that, right? To like trigger MIDI sounds with a MIDI device. It can be done. Now you just got to figure out how to get 2 input sources in, or 1 input source, 1 out. Awesome. I think it's a like doable side project. So maybe you could do that. And then if you do that, you could send me a link to the repo so I could use it. But that's how my process works. Like and then it's always about Can you shrink it down and make the size and the scope small enough that you can get the project accomplished in 2 to 3 days? You don't want to pick something where it's like, oh, I want to rebuild melodics because I think I can do better. And I think it should be this and then that and then this and that. Now that's like a whole like year long, takes a team of developers. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you're going to just reinvent something that people have spent hours and hours and hours building, right? That's not the goal. The goal is to solve a small problem. So the small problem is I just want to be able to trigger the pads over music that's coming from like Spotify or something else, right? That's all you want to start with. Simple, small passion projects. A passion project is not rebuilding melodics. That's insane, right? That's a business idea, right? And so you don't have to come up with a business idea to have a passion project and to just work on something. And I think a lot of people get that confused. You don't have to create a startup. All you need to do is something small. They can demonstrate a skill, they can give you practice, and then you move on and you do another one. And if you take 2 or 3 days and you build these small projects, over the course of a month, imagine how many projects that you're going to have that you can actually walk someone through at an interview. And so that's key. If you're at an interview, you want to have some projects you can demonstrate so that the attention is not 100% focused on you. It could be focused on some of your work, looking at your code, and then nerding out with the person about, hey, these are some things that you built. This is why you built them. This is the interesting technology. This is how you applied it to the situation, etc. So Mr. Pack asked one more question. Where can I get that data related to e-commerce? Good question. I think lots of business owners that are using like let's say Shopify or WooCommerce will be more than happy to provide you a sample of data, or you could do a project for them and basically just say, hey, I'm not going to charge you for it. I just need data. In exchange for the data, they'll give you like access to their sales figures, that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's that hard. Would I recommend switching stacks per project or stick with one until you feel you've got it down? Okay, so in terms of language learning and overall stacks, I guess it's kind of a twofold question. I always try and tell people to focus on learning one language well first. Because after you've learned one well first, it will be easier for to learn others. And so I wouldn't thrash around and say, let's learn React this month, and then next month I'll learn Angular, and I'm seeing a lot of jobs for Vue, so then I'll learn Vue. I don't think that's a great strategy early on for a developer, right? Needless to say, I'm trying to learn 3 instruments at once, right? But the reason why I think it is just easier, it's more efficient, is because there is so much loading that you have to do early on to learn that first, that it really does make sense for you to learn a whole stack, for you to learn a back-end language, a front-end language. And if you're smart, start with JavaScript, because then you have both a back-end and a front-end language or tool that you can use. And then you can sort of shift. And agreed. At that point, once you feel like you've got it down, then sure, as you work on different passion projects, then it's perfectly fine for you to say, hey, I want to try Ember, right? I want to see what that ecosystem is like. I want to give it a test. I want to try Meteor, right? Something that's a little bit different that you're not seeing all the time, and understand why is it that this tool is popular in that particular community. That said, just understand you will still need to do multiple projects in that language or framework before you'll be able to say on a resume, hey, I know Ember, I know Vue, etc. Don't be lulled into thinking that if you do one passion project, you should throw it on your resume and say, I know Vue. Because in my opinion, it's better to have some deep knowledge in at least one language and shallow than it is to just be like, I just have done everything. I've tried all these different tools. Like, I got it, right? Probably not a great use of your time. But if you enjoy learning new things, great. I would just try and focus in on learning more in one, so you're deep in one, at least one thing. Most people like T-shaped experience. They like shallow and then deep in at least one thing. And as long as that one thing is like relevant in your job search in your area, awesome. If it's not, then you might want to consider going deep in something that's relevant in the ecosystem that you're in, right? Ember's not relevant in the ecosystem that I'm in San Diego. It's an interesting technology, but we're not an Ember town, right? There's way more people in San Diego that know React, and then Vue, and then Angular, or maybe Angular, and then React, and then Vue. And then Ember is a much smaller size of like people. And that's fine if you are going for sort of the, well, I want to work in a space where there's not a lot of other people, right? So then it's awesome. Like you go into Erlang or Elixir Phoenix, or you go into COBOL. Like there's lots of really cool niches that you could go into, but just know that you're going into a niche. Don't go into it thinking, oh, well, I think it's kind of popular. It's like, no, you need to know. You're either on the popular side or you're on the niche side. And as a junior engineer looking for your first job, you should be strategic about your approach. It's perfectly fine to say, I want to be in a niche. Awesome. I think COBOL's hot. All these banks, all these big government offices that run their software on COBOL, no one's learned that in college. So you want an easy job finding a job, learn COBOL. Lots of jobs out there. But most people don't want to learn COBOL. So, all right, any other questions? So key takeaway, learn COBOL. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, mike@sdcs.io. Again, mike@sdcs.io. Yeah, we'll do this every week. Learning fundamentals is not popular backend languages like C++ compared to JavaScript. A good idea. Wait, learning fundamentals is not as popular as backend languages like C++. Not sure. I'm not sure what your question is. Oh, learning it in C++ as compared to JavaScript. I mean, what's your logic? Yeah, COBOL. Did I not say COBOL? Sorry, somebody else asked, did I mean COBOL? Yeah, COBOL. Learning fundamentals is not as popular. Yeah, so sure, you could learn it in C++. So I guess whatever language you're going to learn as your foundational language, or the first language that you're going to get really good at, I think it should be, in my personal opinion, in San Diego, it should be JavaScript, C#, or Java, because that's where the prevalence of jobs are. So like if you're going after like what's going to make me most likely to be able to be interviewable, and during the interview, are they going to be able to follow the code that I'm writing? You probably want to have it in one of those languages. C++ is close enough to either Java or C# that it's not going to throw somebody off. But yeah, you're fine. If you want to learn the fundamentals in C++, that's fine. C++ is mostly used for embedded devices in that scenario. Sure, it's fine language choice. Java, same thing. So Java, C++, C#, those would all be good first language choices. JavaScript is just a little different, it's a little quirky. It works and behaves a little bit differently than a lot of other languages, and doesn't have a lot of built-in data structures. It's a little bit more simple and high level. So you might want something a little bit lower level like C++, C#, or Java to be able to show that you understand how you have to manage things like memory and threads and all those other pieces that in a lower level language you have to actually manage yourself. So do I mean COBOL? It's really old language. It is a really old language, but it's actually really, really, really popular and used a lot in large government systems, like most police departments, most hospitals, most like IRS, the state franchise tax board, banks, most banks, all their back office stuff, that's all on COBOL. So it is an old language, but because it would cost so much money for them to do a one-time migration off and onto something else, they're willing to just continue to maintain it. And so the maintenance for it is far less expensive than a complete redesign and rebuild of the platform. So unless they absolutely have to, like the SBA had to do something to be able to like process the checks that they had to get out to the small business owners during the pandemic. But I still don't think they rewrote all of their code. They still have a lot of it. It's probably still in COBOL, still in these huge mainframe computers. And so COBOL is a language du jour on big mainframe systems. So IBM still builds a lot of mainframes. So still doing really well. So don't knock it. Any other questions? I guess I should fill in the gap there. So it is a really old language. Because it's a really old language, a lot of the people that learned it and are responsible for maintaining it right now are old people that will want to retire, and that will want to retire soon, right? So a lot of them are getting to like the age where they're just like, I'm done, I want to retire. And there isn't like a whole bunch of new people flooding in to be in the marketplace to take over for those people that are like, I'm done. I've been doing this for like 30 years. I'm good. So that said, there's a great opportunity there. Kiana Brown, good to see you. Anybody else have any other questions? I'll stick around. If not, ramen spaghetti for lunch. COBOL since 1996. Yeah. It's actually neat for somebody that asked earlier about apprenticeship programs. IBM has an apprenticeship program where they teach COBOL right now. So it is, yeah, it's a thing. People think I'm joking with you, but nope. It's a thing. Good languages or stacks for deployment? Okay. So as far as deploying code, a lot of things are built on the LAMP stack. So that's Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, with PHP being like the scripting language du jour of like most of the internet. So most of the internet right now runs on WordPress. Most of the like front-facing websites on the planet right now are WordPress websites. So PHP, right? So LAMP stack's pretty decent in terms of like deploying things. If you just if you have like virtual machines, deploying a LAMP stack is pretty straightforward, pretty trivial. A lot of people are going in the direction of wanting to use either like Lambda or functions. So they call it serverless. That doesn't mean that there's not a server. It just means that there's not as much of a dedicated server resource that's just on all the time. And instead, takes your code, distills it into a function, then runs that function every time it's triggered by something like inbound traffic or someone like requesting for some data, etc. So I would say, instead of thinking about it from like what's the best language approach, I think about it as like, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? Is it that I want to save resources and money because I have a lot of volume of traffic and I don't want to have to turn on a lot of resources to serve that traffic? So the stack that you're choosing should be appropriate for what that challenge is. So I'll give you an example. You could have a lot of traffic that comes in all at once because it's like maybe you run a TV ad. When you run a TV ad, once you run it, people flood to your website. And then when the ad's off, people can't remember your website, so you get back to normal traffic. So your traffic pattern has these huge spikes in it. So you're going to want to deploy a solution that accounts for that big spike, but then isn't very costly the rest of the time. Now that might mean that you want to have an architecture that starts with a small number of servers, and then you just warm up a lot more servers as you have more traffic, right? So you would want to learn, okay, how do I, regardless of the language and the stack of the code and the applications, how do I get a lot of machines up and available? And then how do I turn them off when they're not being used, right? So I would approach it thinking about like what types of problems you're trying to solve. Are you trying to solve the problem of like needing massive amount of compute power? Okay, that might be a different problem, right? Again, you might want to look for a more optimized low-level language to do those kinds of like heavy transactions, like mining, right? Mining for Bitcoin. That's going to be something that you're going to use a different language for than like making a button on a form work, right? Totally different. So I'd say the stack wise, I'd say the LAMP stack is probably the most common stack for a website, and then like deploying something onto that would be pretty trivial. A lot of people are using languages that have already been mentioned: Java, C#, JavaScript. Golang is pretty popular, and each one of those languages has a few small maybe variants that you'll use instead. So if you're building something on Golang, might be common these days to put on like Kubernetes, right? So on Kubernetes, Golang, and maybe using Nginx for your server for reverse proxy, and I don't know what else might be involved. Database, so MySQL or NoSQL like MongoDB. So it like each one of them has an ecosystem kind of around it. So if you're looking to learn, I'd start with the common ones. I'd start with like in the Microsoft ecosystem, I'd start with C#. And your database is SQL Server, and your trying to think server is going to be Microsoft's got like I don't know Internet Information, so IIE I think. It'll be different for each one. So Maxim Pascal asks, what do I know about learning the C++ framework like Qt or QML language? I know nothing about that is my answer. Because I really haven't, I looked at C# like many years ago, and I really haven't had a need to learn C#. So usually you start with the language and then you start learning the frameworks after you learn the fundamentals of the language. So I never got to the point in C++ where I was learning like the popular frameworks and whatnot. But I'd start with whatever one is the most popular first and learn a popular framework, because there's a reason why the crowd sort of coalesces around things. So try not to go against the grain initially. You can by just like asking in one of the forums or the groups. You can also tell based on like stars, if you look at like GitHub or you look at the other like sort of attributes around technology in the community, and it should be very clear like, oh, this is definitely the thing that everybody in this particular ecosystem uses. Use that initially as your barometer of what to learn first, because you can always learn the more like up-to-date, brand new, fresh, bleeding edge that just came out, and you're not going to be at any disadvantage to anybody else because it just came out. So everybody's going to be learning it at the same time as you. So learn the standard stuff first, then go a little bit deeper into like the specialized, like bleeding edge, do not use this in production. When you see that warning notice, you're on the bleeding edge when it says, do not use this in production. Gregory asks, when people talk about whipping up an EC2 instance or S3 bucket, is that deployment hosting live? Yes. So an EC2 instance is basically like, think of it like your computer, but your computer virtualized, sitting on a server somewhere in a data center. So an EC2 is like the standard way to describe virtualizing the computer, taking all of the like logic and the operating system and all that and throwing it onto a server somewhere that you can just rent per the hour that you have it turned on, right? So for every hour, it might cost you, 5 cents, might cost you 25 cents, depending on how much memory and RAM and other resources that it has. So when they talk about whipping it up, what they're talking about is turning on one of those instances with maybe just an operating system on it, and then loading whatever the additional part of the stack is onto that operating system, and then connecting to it things like maybe a load balancer so you can get traffic coming into it, but if it goes down, it can redirect traffic elsewhere, just in case that server is offline for some reason. So an S3 bucket is a little bit more like, they call it infrastructure as a service. So an S3 bucket is a place where you can put data. So the machine already has an operating system, it has memory, it's got some disk space set aside, and basically you're connecting to it and you're able to put some data there that then becomes available. You can point people to it and they can find that data. So it's a simple way for you to host like a static web page where it's just HTML and JavaScript, and there's nothing that has to actually on the server side send or receive anything other than files. So normally an S3 bucket, it could be a great, easy place for you to host a website, especially if it's just HTML and JavaScript. Now, if it's PHP, or if it's Node, or if it's some other server-side language, the S3 bucket is not going to work for you because that's just for hosting files and delivering files. You need an EC2 instance. You need a whole server, and the server needs to know how to route incoming requests and how to send back the information. Because when it routes the incoming request, if it's PHP, it has to route the incoming request, it has to translate PHP to HTML and send back HTML. The only thing your browser knows how to deal with, the only things your browser knows how to deal with are HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then the various image file types and things like that. It doesn't know how to deal with PHP files or C++ files, right? So S3 bucket, not quite enough. I have not heard of SoSo. So no idea what that is. I haven't heard of a lot of things, so I'm not ashamed. Don't be surprised if I haven't heard of like most of the things that you may come across on the internet. Any other questions? I feel like this was a deeply technical one today, but fun nonetheless. Good stuff. I asked earlier about what you think about learning Azure, Cloud Admin, AWS, GCP, and this is going to help you get a job in Center after getting a certification. Okay. Certifications and getting jobs are not the same. So I would say you got to get good. If you want to get good, pick one of those. Doesn't matter. You can any of them will be fine. The top dog, everybody's like got a different opinion on this, but the top dog, in my opinion, is AWS. It's been around for a long time. It's got all the knobs and bells and whistles, and it is still the top dog. You look at like lion's share of the of users and how much they're bringing in and stuff. It's still AWS. They're still tops. So you got AWS, you got Azure, you got Google Compute Cloud or Google Compute Platform, GCP. So I'd say, again, going into it, it's first learning enough that you can bring some competence and expertise to the company, and then getting a certification. Merely having the certification and knowing enough to pass the certification exam is not enough for someone to hire you. They'll usually want to see a combination of experience and the certification. You can get experience on your own. Like you can get experience building up projects and you can get certified. Like it's very doable as a passion project and not that expensive, right? So here's what I would suggest. If you're really interested in DevOps and you're really interested in getting certified for DevOps, I would learn infrastructure as code. What that means is you're going to learn something like Terraform. And then what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to demonstrate, I have all these repositories where you can see my work. That's going to be like the evidence that, hey, I've done all these passion projects where I've like spun up infrastructure and orchestrated the applications. And I've made sure that everything is, is working. And I've used some of these open source projects. So you don't have to worry about writing the code. You can like pull down applications you can find that are open source applications and you can run them inside of environments. And then you can demonstrate via code, infrastructure as code, that I know how to set these things up. And it'll be super obvious to someone when they look at your repository, like, oh, this is well organized. He actually is able to go through the steps and demonstrate that you're spinning up the infrastructure in a way that's secure and it actually works. That would be enough to get you in the door for an interview for sure. But merely saying you've worked on projects and then having a certificate, probably not enough to get you the phone call to have like a conversation. And that's where you got to get to. You got to get to the point where they're convinced just by looking at your resume, by looking at your body of work. Okay, it makes sense for us to have a phone conversation and then bring this person on site. That's what it's going to take to get a job. You got to get on site. So that's how I would approach it. I would learn Terraform or Ansible, Puppet, Chef. There's a variety of tools that you could use to do infrastructure as code. I would basically want to be able to use that to demonstrate, not only do I know the fundamentals, but I know how to actually orchestrate and deploy services in a way that's very repeatable. So you could do it with Ansible scripts, that's fine. You could do it with Puppet, Chef, Terraform, a whole bunch of different ones. A group of people get together, put 500 in the pot each month. Someone gets all of the investment. Kind of, sort of. So the best way to think about why Amazon is so popular and why it's become sort of a norm to have these like either Google Compute or AWS or Azure is a lot of times your server is going to sit idle and it's not going to be doing anything. So it's kind of a waste of resources and electricity. You just got your computer on. If you think about it, if you run your computer all day and you're not in front of it all day, like that's a waste of computing power. But imagine if you could like lease out portions of like every hour of your computer's time. And for a while you lease it to one person and then for a while you lease it to the other. And I say lease because you really are renting it for that time. All of the resources are allocated to you. So it's not so much it's like not so much like a zero sum game where like winner takes all and you're splitting the pot. It's more like, again, like subleasing the space. That's a better way of thinking about it. It's not so much everybody pays a little, one person gets the whole thing. It's not. I don't think that's a good analogy. It's sort of like a mental model. I think it's a better mental model to think about it like if you had a house and you started renting out rooms in your house. When you rent out that room, like that's it. It's not yours anymore for that month until that person moves out, and then you could either put it in somebody else's name or so. Oh, so if you're talking about blockchain, but blockchain for websites, I guess I'm confused. So maybe if you could clarify what you mean by. Okay, so let's say you're working on a platform like ServiceNow where you aren't necessarily pushing projects to GitHub. Would it make sense to do coding challenges like Code Wars and then push that work to GitHub? Just to show that you're coding every day. Oral, nice. Sure, it doesn't hurt to do those, but here's what I'd say. There's two rules that I always say for people that are going to do code challenges. The first rule, so you should be pairing with someone, so you have to actually talk and work together, right? Super important. And the second is it should be secondary to passion projects. So I think if you're working on a platform where you're not able to demonstrate as much, then I would say you should, then I would say you should do passion projects first, and then as a separate aside, the next more valuable thing is doing like Leak Code or Code Wars or anything else that kind of keeps you fresh with like the just code challenges. So code challenges are great as long as you're doing them with someone else and as long as they're secondary to passion projects, right? So you can still do them, but don't do them in lieu of passion projects. That's not a good combo. Not a good combo. So Greg, that was for Soso. I was referring to my bad, not the Amazon instance. Oh, I don't know what Soso is yet, so I have to look it up. But I'll look it up. If you want to send me a link, shoot me a link or something. I'll take a look at it and see. Yeah, maybe that's how this is whole 500 each, and then everybody gets $1,500. Sounds kind of like a lending circle or some kind. All right. Any other questions? Sounds like you're cooking up a mad passion project, Gregory. So I like it. Get some blockchain action in there. Could be interesting. All right. Unless I hear anything else, I'm going to jump off and I will see you all next week. Oh, wait. One last question. Oh, this is a super giant question. Very general. What do you really need to start a job in tech in San Diego? You need to be able to demonstrate that you have some fundamental skill, right? So if it were like a web development job, you'd want to be able to demonstrate you understand the foundations, right? Because the hardest part is learning those like fundamental basic foundations, right? To get you from like 0 to 30. Once you can demonstrate you have the 0 to 30, then the next thing you're trying to demonstrate to that company is that you have a tremendous upside, that you're a steal. Like you need to get me now while I'm still undervalued by the marketplace, right? You've got to have enough skill to demonstrate that to someone. So they're going to want to see things like I talk all the time. I use the word passion. It's really important. They want to see you have a passion for what you're doing because the passion will stay. Your skill will get better over time. So they're gambling that if we bring you in now while you're still early career, you will be amazing in 2 or 3 years if they just put a little bit of effort in, right? So it's kind of like, if you think of it like a plant, like if you're going to go buy a starter plant, right? You can go to Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever you want to go, right? And you can buy a little starter, a little seedling, right? Now you can buy a seeds in a packet, but most companies are like, I don't want a seed in the packet. I want a little seedling, right? And they'll take the seedling and they'll water and fertilize it and put it in bigger pots and put it in the greenhouse first and then put it out in the yard. And then next thing you know, it's flourishing. You want to demonstrate that, like, I'm going to thrive. If you give me a bigger pot with water, I'm going to thrive. As long as you have that level of like passion, that's what you have to demonstrate. You've got passion projects, you've got a portfolio, you're paying attention to details, you got a GitHub account, you're putting meaningful work in there. It's not like ride along projects where you're doing a project on Free Code Camp and then you're throwing it in there. No one wants to see that noise, right? That's what everybody else is doing. I want to see you were like learning drums and you decided you want to build a MIDI app. So you built like a little MIDI interface. Boom. That's nice, right? That's what it takes to get a job. You've got to convince someone that you have a brighter upside than the next entry-level developer. And as long as you can do that, then you'll have that conversation. And then it will just be about executing. At the end of the day, can you execute? If they say, hey, you need a little bit more experience with this, do you go out and get that experience? If you do, awesome, you'll be there. In terms of actual like curriculum, I think most coding boot camps are going to have the curriculum. I think Free Code Camp has the curriculum. So when you talk about like what skills do you have to master, well, you can go through either on your own or you can go through a boot camp. That material, though, isn't going to just by osmosis like go into your brain and be able to help you execute. You have to actually have the passion and desire to see a problem and work through a solution to the problem. And I say a problem, I mean like a business problem. You see a business problem and be able to create a solution for that problem. That's it. It's just that simple. If you can do that, you get a job. So foundations, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, if you're looking for a web development job. And then once you know the basic foundations, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you probably want to pick up a marker library because it'll make you able to develop much faster if you know React or Vue or Angular. And then you should be solid to be able to get an entry-level role. That's it. It's that easy. I mean, it's not easy. It's a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of hours of effort, but it's not complex. It's pretty straightforward. It's just kind of hard. Any other questions? Feel free, drop them in the chat boxes. We got this going on LinkedIn. We got a YouTube recording. Got Periscope. Still trying. I don't know if anybody's using Periscope, but it still exists. We are building up our Twitch too. Like this is a real thing now on Twitch. So excited to see that happening. How's this working for people? Give me a like, give me a thumbs up or something if you like this. Share it with people. Let them know this is a real thing. Dart or Flutter? I mean, you can. I'm not a huge fan of like someone that's early career learning Dart or Flutter because you could probably learn JavaScript in a fraction of the time and you'd have more that you could do with it. So you could, I mean, when people will ask about a very specific language, like, should I learn Objective-C or should I learn Swift or should I learn, so those would be for iOS. For Android, it would be like, should I learn Java or should I learn Kotlin? Like, Kotlin's pretty cool. Like learning Kotlin as your first language, that'd be pretty dope. But at the end of the day, you'd only have like one language, and that one language is very different than most other things. And the ecosystem around Kotlin is so much smaller and compressed. So I'd say weighing all things evenly, I'd say only go after that if it's really important for you to do that thing. If like your thing is Android devices, you love Android devices and you really want to just build for Android. You want to build something like you're just super excited about the platform, the company, everything. Great, learn Kotlin, learn Java, right? But if that's not the case, then I'd say probably not the first thing I'd learn. I mean, sure, you can learn Dart or Flutter, but it's not the first thing I'd learn. I learned JavaScript first. I'm just a JavaScript guy. I mean, I'm president of the San Diego JavaScript organization, so I am biased. But that said, it's a much more flexible tool and you can do more with it. So what often happens with folks that are early on and they pick a language that's like not the norm, and instead they start somewhere like Dart or Flutter, there just aren't as many resources. There aren't as many people. You won't be able to connect with as many people that will be excited about talking about Dart or Flutter with you. There won't be as much support. It'll be harder for you to do certain things because those languages are designed for very specific use cases. So they're the right tool for doing specific things. Just know that you're sort of like, it's like picking an obscure instrument to learn as your first instrument, right? You could learn to play the drums or keyboard or the pads, Or you could learn something like super obscure, and it's fine. Some people want to learn that. Some people they want to pick the violin, learn the violin. It's hard as heck, but like if that's your thing, do it. Hopefully that makes sense. Dart or Flutter would be the equivalent of learning the violin, right? And something like JavaScript would be the equivalent of learning like the piano, right? Foundational. Everyone's going to know it. But either one of them are going to apply. Like they're still writing music, right? Hopefully these instrument ones are working for people, even though I know most people have never played an instrument. So, but awesome. All right, we're going to end here. We're a little over, but this one's been good. I love the energy. I love the fact that in 2021 people are excited. So nice. Yeah, we should talk offline. Mr. Pascal. Yeah, the never landing a job part, like I need to dig a little bit more deep into that, but I don't think it's just learning the languages that's the key. There's a whole bunch of other steps to the process. So that's a process. Treat it like a job. Treat the job search like a job, and you're gonna be fine. If you treat the job search kind of like a random activity where sometimes you like doing certain things and you don't like doing other things, it can be really frustrating because it just takes a lot longer. You'll still be successful if you just keep at it, but it just takes a lot longer if your search isn't like super optimized. So that's why we do this every week. We went super deep and technical on this one. We usually don't go this technical, but I'm more than happy to answer these questions. And again, we'll be back next week. So next Tuesday, same thing, 12 noon. We'll jump on, spend about an hour or so just answering people's questions and hopefully being helpful in the job search. Later.